Welcome to IDDI webinar on assessing treatment benefit in immuno-oncology. My name is Laurence Colette and I'm a biostatistician working for IDDI Consulting and Research Department. So today, and as this conference illustrates, the field of immuno-oncology is extremely busy. We have several thousands of studies studying immuno-oncology, and the drug development time frame for those drugs and drug combination is much shorter in general than the drug development time that we knew for former generations of anti-cancer treatments. What is special about immunotherapies and what we want to discuss today is its particularly atypical response pattern with features that we've learned over time, such as pseudo-progression and the decision sometimes of clinicians to treat past progression. The fact that some of the responses to those treatments are of extremely long duration, that we sometimes see, and this is illustrated on this slide, a possibility of cure in a proportion of the patients. We also saw features of hyperprogression, whereby some patients don't respond at all and progress very quickly on treatment. And there is also the possibility of abscopal effect from radiation when combined with immunotherapy. So in particular, when dealing with the statistical question of how to quantify the benefit of immunotherapy, we will discuss now pseudo-progression. So pseudo-progression has been seen according to analyzed group series in 7 to 10% of melanoma patients, and in other solid tumors in 1 to 2% of patients. So pseudo-progression is the feature whereby early on treatment, and this is illustrated on a melanoma patient here, we see extremely fast and important progression of the disease, which is followed by a regression, and in this case, a partial response. So unlike with classical agents, we do see responses after signs of progression, and there is also evidence that patients who have, in whom we see pseudo-progression have a better outcome in general than patients with a classic progression per the classical RECIST evaluation criteria. So this led to the development by the RECIST group of RECIST criteria dedicated to immunotherapy that they called iRECIST. And the number one feature of this new response criteria is that unlike in RECIST, and this is illustrated here, where the first sign of either increase of existing lesions or appearance of new lesion would call a patient for being progressive, with iRECIST, there is the new notion of unconfirmed progression and the new requirement to confirm the progression at the next assessment. So if we take here the patient whose size of lesion is illustrated in blue, according to RECIST, this patient would be assigned a progression status at the first evaluation time when the lesions have increased by 20%. But for iRECIST, we would go beyond this first sign of progression and require a next assessment confirming that there is a clear progression. And in this patient in particular, we see that after this early sign of progression, the lesion size decreases so that this progression is not confirmed, and we will need to have another increase here, which will again qualify the patient as unconfirmed progression on immunotherapy, which in this case would be confirmed when new lesions would appear, or in this case, when there is also an increase of the existing lesions. So for this patient, according to iRECIST, the progression time of the confirmed progression would be when we have the second unconfirmed progression, which can be in this case confirmed, and we can have time point responses beyond the first sign of progression. So the impact of this modification of the classification of response is that we have in general a longer time to progression than with the classical RECIST criteria. But when we look at the impact in terms of rate of response, several series that have reanalyzed existing trials according to both criteria have identified that essentially the proportion of change in response is really small. So we see in this series that they had 23.6% response with RECIST and 24.7% with iRECIST, which corresponds to just 1 to 2% difference, and the same in this second series. So in terms of the response evaluation criteria, it's, I mean, the application of iRECIST criteria requires quite some extra burden to both the sites and the data center, because the criteria are much more complex than the RECIST criteria. But in terms of the evaluation of the endpoint response, we do feel that, especially outside of melanoma, the use of this criteria might add unnecessary burden. All the more, iRECIST has been developed as a consensus and is not a set of validated criteria. So we would not recommend to use those criteria iRECIST as a phase 2 endpoint, but rather as a secondary endpoint to studies. So what is illustrated here is that the response that is in gray with iRECIST, the duration would, however, be much longer. But again, in terms of endpoint to a study, we would not recommend to use a duration of response as an endpoint. And the reason for this is that response duration is measured only in responders. So it is not an endpoint that can be assessed on the basis of randomization, and hence it is subject to selection bias. So there has been some work done by Korn recently to try to adjust for this selection bias. And this graphic illustrates that once you correct for this selection bias by adjusting the responses for this, obviously we will have a smaller effect of the treatment from the adjusted response duration comparison. So again, response duration is not, in our eyes, a very good endpoint. So in general, when response is not a good endpoint, or time duration of response is not a good endpoint, we revert to time to event endpoints. And traditionally, we have a choice between overall survival or progression-free survival. What we see here, and I've shown this picture already, is that we will see a bit different response patterns compared to the traditional agents, in that even with a very prolonged follow-up, we seem to see the curves plateauing at some point. And I will come back to that in terms of how this will affect the approach to the design of phase 3 studies. Historically, overall survival has not been accepted easily on the grounds that it is an endpoint that brings a smaller number of events compared to earlier endpoints such as PFS. It has a longer time to event. In general, the treatment effects were smaller on OS than on PFS, and not all patients die of their disease. Therefore, this endpoint is also subject to dilution of the treatment effects due to competing risks, but also to the treatments that are given upon progression of the disease. However, when we look back at selected trials of checkpoint inhibitors, in particular given as a single agent, we've seen that unlike in many other cases that we had seen with traditional agents, we have instances where no effect is seen on PFS, but a treatment benefit is seen in OS. So it means that for immuno-oncology, the endpoint PFS may sometimes be misleading in terms of evaluation of the true benefit of a treatment. So when we look at the curves for PFS and OS, we again see specific features. Here we see the very sharp decrease that is followed by a delayed divergence of the two treatments, which for the statistician means that there is a non-proportional effect. We see the same in the study of Pembro versus chemotherapy. And here in this other study of nivolumab versus docetaxel, we see that initially the two curves stay together. They then diverge with the benefit in favor of docetaxel, and then they cross. And in the long term, for patients who survive a long term, nivolumab is better. So in terms of statistics, it means that the proportionality assumption is not valid for this endpoint when comparing checkpoint inhibitors to more classical agents or placebo. So when we look at OS curves, we see, and this is the OS curves for the same comparisons, we see again delayed treatment effect, a possibility of cure, crossing hazards, and here non-proportionality of the treatment effects. So the consequences of this in terms of designs of randomized phase 2 or phase 3 trials is a loss of statistical power, because if the treatment effect kicks in only after a certain time lag, the treatment benefit will be diluted when measured with the classical measures such as the hazard ratio. We see a lack of association between the various efficacy endpoints. So PFS effects and OS effects may not always be the same. We may have effects on one and not see an effect on the other. And in terms of the conduct of the study, this means that we may easily draw incorrect conclusions from interim analyses. In particular, if it's an instance when no effect is seen on PFS, although if the study was continued, we would see an effect on OS, there is a risk of stopping a trial early for lack of efficacy, when in fact longer follow-up would have shown a benefit. And this might have happened, for example, in the study that is illustrated on the right. It may also be that this apparent late divergence comes from the fact that there are two subgroups of patients, a sensitive and a non-sensitive subgroup, which may cause this say shape of the PFS and OS curves. And in this case, an interim analysis must be organized in such a way that there is sufficiently that there are enough events in both subgroups, and in particular in the sensitive subgroup, in order to make early conclusions. And this is in order to avoid stopping a trial when in fact there is treatment benefit in a subset. So in general, early signals may not be representative of longer term effects, which make the use of early interim looks at the data and early decisions to stop a trial very, very difficult. As also the benefit of the treatment may not be the same at all follow-up times, the usual measures of reporting results, such as the hazard ratio and the median ratio, may not be very easy, and the treatment benefit itself may be difficult to understand and communicate to the medical doctors who need to make effective decisions. Solutions for this when it comes to reporting and planning and analyzing phase 3 studies are the following. So we still have the log-rank test, which is the classical test for comparing two curves. It is still valid for the types of treatment effects that we've illustrated before, but it will require slightly larger and a longer trial duration in general. Cure models can be used when it is really expected that a proportion of the patients will be cured. This kind of model may be used for the design of studies, but it is important to note that we need to have enough follow-up in order to observe the cure in a study, because obviously the patients will survive long. If they are cured, then we need to see this long survival to identify that the patient is not just censored, but is actually a true cured patient. So more practical approaches have been devised whereby weighted log-rank tests are proposed, or restricted mean survival and combination tests. So I will quickly pass through those. So in this example, which is Keynote 042, Pembro was compared to chemotherapy for patients who were expressing PD-L1 and had non-small cell lung cancer. We have here the curves of PFS, and as illustrated, the chemotherapy was better for the first segment of the follow-up, and pembrolizumab was better after about month 8 of follow-up. For this reason, the hazard ratio of 1.07 is actually an average of the detriment for pembro that is seen early on, and the benefit of pembro that is seen later on, and averages out to a non-significant treatment benefit. So to resolve this problem, people have proposed to weight the observations at various time points of the follow-up differently. So if we take here the observations, the log-rank test is actually going to weight the differences seen at all follow-up times equally. So it gives an equal weight to early and late divergences. The weighted versions of the log-rank test may either put the emphasis on the early part of the curve, on the later part of the curve, or on the middle part of the curve. And this is what is indicated here. We have weighting which will be proportionate either to the survival fraction or to the deceased fraction. And the weighting scheme will result in placing more or less weight on early or late deviations. So if we reanalyze this same data with this late different test, then we will see that we will get a significant p-value. However, one doesn't always know exactly what the treatment effect would be. And if your treatment effect is actually not delayed, then using such tests may result in a loss of power compared to the log-rank test. Furthermore, you need again to have long follow-up to see this benefit. And if you were to analyze your trial here at this point, even this test may not be significant. So it's also important to note that, of course, you get a statistically significant result, but this test is really showing a difference between the two treatments, but cannot be concluded to be to show superiority, because as we, by construction, this test is not taking into account this early feature where the experimental treatment here, pembrolizumab, is actually detrimental. So a combination of weighted tests has been proposed, which actually works as follows. One would conduct all the possible combination tests that we've illustrated here. So the classical log-rank, the test that gives emphasis on early deviations, the test that gives emphasis on late deviation, as well as a test that gives emphasis on middle deviation. And the test that would result eventually for the comparison would be taken as the maximum of any of those tests. So you wouldn't need to know upfront which kind of deviation from non-proportionality is present in your data. This test has improved power for non-pH alternatives compared to the Lagrange test. It has a slight reduction in power if the proportionality assumption does hold. So we generally recommend using this test when there is strong belief that the treatment benefit will not be simply proportionate, so that the benefit will not be present with the same relative magnitude at all follow-up times. However, one must note that if using a one-sided version of this test could actually reject the null hypothesis in favor of both the treatment and the control for the same data. And this is because this test, when you do the one-sided test in favor of Pembro, would pick this benefit, but if you would do the one-sided test in the opposite direction, it would pick the test that tests on the early difference. So two-sided versions would be more appropriate. In terms of reporting results, we also find that there is some value at looking at alternatives to the hazard ratio, and in particular at the mean survival time, which can be seen as an alternative to the reporting of the median survival. So essentially the mean survival time, if all patients would eventually die, if you had complete follow-up, would be the area under the survival curve. So the proportion of maximum survival that was observed in the study given the follow-up observed. The thing is that in general, we do not follow the studies until everyone died or everyone had a PFS event. So we need to truncate the follow-up at a fixed time point. In this case, we can still estimate what is called now the restricted mean survival time, because it's restricted to a specific horizon, the end of the follow-up. And again, we have the restricted mean survival time as the area under the survival curve. With this, we can do comparisons by calculating the area under the curve for one treatment and the alternative treatment. In this case, we have an example with docetaxel and nivolumab, where we see here the area under the blue curve, which is represented here, 13 months, and the area under the green curve, which is represented on the left and is 11.3 months. And we can report the difference, which is 1.7 months on average with a confidence interval. And we can also do a formal comparison of the restricted mean survival time. So compared to the hazard ratio, which here is an average of what happens early on and later, the restricted mean survival time difference may be more easy to apprehend for the clinician. Some of the features of the restricted mean survival time, the statistical significance of the results and the estimated treatment effect depend on the chosen time horizon. So differences may be potentially exaggerated if the time horizon is chosen post hoc, as by tuning the time horizon here, you may actually decide on a truncation time that would maximize the treatment benefit. So it is required to prospectively select the time before the study. However, this may prove to be sometimes challenging, especially when studying a drug for the first time. And a poor choice can obviously result in reduced power. So restricted mean survival time is an appealing approach, in particular for reporting results. There are versions of the restricted mean survival time method that are attempting to let the procedure select the time t and so the time horizons, while the test will adjust for the bias that I just discussed. However, this test, we wouldn't recommend it really because it may sometimes lead to statistically significant results that may not be the ones that as a drug developer you would be interested in. For example, if we reanalyze the KEYNOTE study with this type of approach, the procedure would naturally select the crossing points and would effectively report a significant result, but in favor of the chemotherapy in this case, because this is the time point when the maximum difference would be observed. So this versatile method may play in your favor, but may actually not give you the effective test that you want, that you aimed your study to evaluate. So in conclusion, when it comes to evaluating results and effects of immunotherapies, we consider that iRECIST is a consensus criteria, is not validated, and is a useful adjunct to the classical RECIST criteria, but we would not recommend its use, and users must be aware that it comes with additional burden and therefore cost. Traditional analysis using the Lagrange test for time to event endpoints is still valid. It may require some increase of the sample size to compensate for the lack of power, but it is still a valid possibility. The alternatives would be to use the max combo test, so the one that picks the maximum of a plausible set of weighted Lagrange tests. The hazard ratio as a measure of treatment effects for time to event endpoints may be questionable in immuno-oncology trials, so you may wish to present a variation of the hazard ratio over time to document your treatment effect. Alternatives such as the restricted mean survival time exist, but they are vulnerable to amount of censoring and sometimes choice of threshold or weights. The best is always obviously to look at the survival curves for the interpretation. And we would also warn against group sequential testing plans, in particular aggressive ones, and plans that would envisage very early tests in the presence of non-proportional treatment effects, because they may be extremely misleading. So with this, I will conclude my talk and be happy to take any questions you may have.